Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources and the co-founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member Magazine. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here to the show at the New York Stock Exchange. This is actually part 2 of a series that we're doing called A Roadmap to Onboard Your Board Member and Committee Chairs. And today it's going to be the director perspective. And I'd like to introduce my guests. To my immediate right is Laurie Siegel, who is a board member with CenturyLink, FactSet, and California Resources Corporation, serves as the comp chair on 2 of those and on the compensation committee on the 3rd.
You've got that right.
And to her right, who sort of launched us off last week, describing the guide that was done by the Center on Executive Compensation, is Tim Bartle, who's the CEO of the Center. Welcome back, Tim.
Thanks, TK.
So, Laurie, as I had mentioned in the introduction of the last show, everything, not everybody, but there's certainly a trend that particularly new directors aren't satisfied with the onboarding process. And I think with the duties that boards have, it's been a growing concern to make sure that people are prepared as early as possible to contribute to the board. Yes, they have to listen and feel their way a little bit, but what they also need to be ready to contribute because that's where they've been asked to serve. So do you see, knowing that there's not complete satisfaction out there, do you see companies aware of that and sort of putting more energy and effort into their onboarding process?
I do. I think there's definitely still considerable room for improvement. I think that what's happening now is we're having a real generational shift in terms of who's coming onto boards. We have boards actively seeking younger directors, more diverse directors, skills like digital and cyber. So it's not the classic, sort of former director and CEO necessarily in all cases. Those directors may or may not have had exposure to a boardroom before. And, for many, even very senior executives, the boardroom is an absolute black box. They just don't know what happens there. And so demystifying the processes that go on in the boardroom are certainly important. But I think it's more than allowing a director to devour information on, either publicly traded reports or analyst reports or insider company provided information. It really is giving them access to the culture, giving them access to people in the company, letting them build key relationships deeper in the organization, and building their confidence, because we don't just want these directors to come onto boards and participate. We actually want them to shift corporate culture. And so I think it takes an awful lot of confidence coming in order for them to really bring their full potential to the board. So I think in addition to the sort of standard interview process, the mailing of information, I think that boards are allowing directors to customize their orientation, to figure out where their gaps are, and to really deep a little diver in before they're actually participating in their first board meeting.
So we had the chance to work with some next-gen board leaders that we do at Diligent, and it was interesting to hear that one of the things they valued most was the dinners before and after.
Absolutely.
So they could get to know board members on a different level, not just in the business sense.
Correct, yes. I mean, I think relationships really do matter. Generally in the interview process, you develop some sort of rapport with the lead director and probably the CEO. But particularly if you're serving on a committee, those relationships are important. So I think, and I think other members of the management team, including the CHRO, as we've talked about and has been called out in the guide.
Yeah, well, that takes us back to the guide, because I wanted to ask you, so here you are as a pretty seasoned committee chair. You participated in contributing to the guide, but when you went and read the guide, what did you as an experienced person take away from it? Like, what were like aha moments for you that said, geez, I have to remember that?
Sure. Well, one thing I think is very distinctive about this guide is that it really deals very much with the role of the CHRO in onboarding both a director coming on at large and a director coming into the comp committee or as the comp committee chair. And the CHRO does, in fact, have a very important role, and it's seldom talked about, and it's seldom been sort of defined. And so I think the guide goes a long way in doing that. In the appendix, actually, there's a, I think you may have referred to this, there's a guide to how the comp committee chair and the CHRO really discuss how they're going to work together. And it's just outstanding, and something that I intend to use with the CHROs of my companies, because I've never seen anything that really sets the roadmap for what needs to happen with that relationship. And then there's some very specific practices that I really love. I think this notion, particularly for new directors, of providing feedback, of a maybe 6-month checkpoint, and a year more formal discussion with the lead director is imperative. I think very few boards do that. It's quite awkward when a new director has a gap and nobody's talking about it.
Right.
And so knowing that that will happen and there's somebody owns that responsibility is critically important.
So I can't tell you how much fun it is for me to have you, and I'm sorry that we only have this short period of time because I have so many questions that I want to ask, but I'm going to take the liberty of asking at least a couple of them. So with your experience on serving on 3 committees and chairing 2, what did you find, like when you first took your first comp chair position, what were your biggest challenges? What sort of happened that you weren't quite prepared for, or didn't expect, or was more egregious than you thought it would be?
Well, you know, TK, I started early in my career as a comp consultant, and then was a CHRO. So I had been through in many comp committee meetings, and one thing I knew coming in is that each is very distinct in terms of the culture, in terms of the processes, in terms of who owns what responsibility. So I knew that I had to really sort of pay attention to what the expectations were of me and whether the expectations I had of others were known and whether I had communicated them. But very key processes work differently, committee to committee. And one that really comes to mind is CEO pay and how that's decided. So what information is brought to the committee at what time? How is that integrated with the conversation that somebody is having with the CEO about their performance? Is that a conversation that the comp committee chair participates in, so there's a link between the performance discussion and the pay, or is there not? Every committee and every board will handle that very differently. So you've really got to understand some of these very key processes. Who's on first and what's your role?
Yeah, and I'm sure every board is different.
Every board is different, exactly, yes.
So my last question, I am often on my soapbox talking about the importance of the type of skill sets that are necessary for an outside chairman of the board who's going to have to meet with shareholders. And I am often on that same soapbox saying one of the skill sets that a comp chair needs is similar skills, because there's one area that investors do not want to hear from the CEO about, and that's their own pay, okay? So that means that the person that they want to talk to is chair of the comp committee. So my question to you, with your experience, is have you been asked to meet with investors because they don't want to hear from the CEO about pay, they want to hear from you?
Oh, certainly. And it's changed a lot in the last few years. So it used to be that in the spirit of shareholder outreach, we would reach out to our maybe top 10 shareholders, said, you want to talk to us? And they would mostly say no. Now they not only say yes, but they do want to talk to the comp committee chair. And so that is both a very scripted event, because you have to be careful that you're not saying anything that hasn't been disclosed. But it also is a dialogue, and I learn from our shareholders. They have opinions not only on CEO pay, they have very distinct opinions on metrics, which I find it interesting to hear. They have distinct opinions on dilution and the level of stock we give out. So I have engaged in conversations with shareholders on almost all the committees that I've been participating on. And I have to say, thankfully, it's become a very productive use of my time, and hopefully as well as theirs.
Well, it certainly can be, and I think that all board members should be more publicly ready to answer simple questions from shareholders, which, if you remember in the past, outside counsel would always advise
Not to do it.
not
Absolutely.
to have those
Yeah,
discussions.
you bet.
So
You bet.
it's interesting. But, well, listen, Tim, remind our audience where they can get a copy of the guide again.
Sure, if you go to our website at www.execcomp.org, that has 2 C's in the middle, and look under resources on Center Publications, you'll find the guide at the top 2 documents.
Well, Laurie and Tim, I want to thank you guys
My
for taking the
pleasure.
time to join us here at the Exchange.
Thanks again,
And
TK.
it's good information, so I think we've helped our audience in that sense. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks again.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.